thank you for joining me here on Occhi. I think my first question would be, particularly for readers unfamiliar with your background, can you share what drew you into a career in the arts?
Yeah. I'll tell you very simply. I think I was 13 or so, and I didn't play music until then. And I was in school and part of the public school system and started playing trumpet in seventh grade. I had a wonderful teacher, a man named Alan Steyer, who was a true inspiration to me throughout my life. And gosh, I took to it like a water to fish in a way. But like everything, you display some natural ability and you have to work at it.
Hmm.
And I found that I really enjoyed doing the work. That was the thing. I really enjoyed practicing. I really enjoyed playing with other people and getting into it. So I felt like I found myself at a young age. I think that's what, we all have try to
Yeah,
find the things that interest us in life,
yeah,
who
yeah.
we are. And
Right,
that kind of spoke to me. And that was it. From that point on, there was no turning back.
great, great. And you studied at the High School of Music and Arts, and then later Berkeley. So, can you kind of share with us your experiences there and how that further shaped your career or your appreciation of music?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I started this trumpet playing in junior high school, and then 3 years later went to high school. And the first day I walked into the school, I did not know a soul in the school at all. It's one of these schools where people come from all around the city to this place, so it's not like someone from your neighborhood is going to show up.
Yeah.
So I walk in, and I'm sitting in this room, and I realize, shoot, I might be in the wrong room here. And someone comes up to me, an older classmate, and says, "I think you're in the wrong room." And he literally took me and walked me to the classroom I was supposed to be in. And that first day was extraordinary. Meeting people, you meet people, they're just like me. Wow, there are other people like me out there in the world. This is amazing.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and I felt like I belonged. And it was great. I mean, being at Music and Art was incredibly inspiring. My classmates were, to be, I mean, at that time they were incredible musicians, but they went on to play with incredible people as well. So, all of them, yeah, I could go on, and I would just mention a few of this, Bernard Wright, who was a great keyboard player, who played with Miles for a short time, played with Marcus Miller a lot. They were very good friends.
mm.
Bernie Drayton, who played with, Keith Richards in his Winos band, and many other great rock acts. Larry Aberman, great drummer, who played with Joe Sample, amongst many others. And my buddy Tony Mangurian, who was a co-producer with Daniel Lenoir with U2 and Willie Nelson. It was amazing. It was just incredible, to be around that as a young kid and to see this.
Yeah. One of the things that you're most likely asked, particularly with a long career, is your early influences. So I suppose you were being influenced by your peers at the college, at the school.
Yes.
But were there any particular mentors, any teachers that had a particular influence on you?
Well,
You remember?
at Music and Art, there's the great jazz educator Justin DeChocho, who, after he was at Music and Art, went on to head the jazz program at Manhattan School of Music. A tremendous, influence on me for sure. The private bass teachers I had studied with, Ken Smith and Rich Samelin, amazing. When I was at Berkeley, gosh, that's when everything really starts to take off. You study with people like Herb Pomeroy, Michael Gibbs, John Laporta. I was very lucky to have taken some private classes with Steve Swallow, with John Abercrombie. You find yourself just kind of moving in this, with these people, and you show up, and it just becomes the norm. It becomes the thing. But it's inspiration, 24/7.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine.
I should also
I mean,
I also have to mention Gary Burton. Studying with Gary was incredible. I mean, the lessons I learned from him are still with me every single day.
yeah, yeah. No, you've got a plethora of influences, and as a consequence, no doubt, you're influencing a plethora of musicians too. So, yeah,
I
well,
hope so.
well done. No, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. And particularly film composers. I mean, I know you've produced over well over 100, 150 odd scores for TV and film. Were there any projects when you look back at your career that have sort of, I don't know, provided a particular challenge, not in necessarily a bad way, but just in a challenge that has made you sort of review your approach or your methodology towards sort of film composition?
There have been projects along the way that have caused me to stop. It's having scored so many films. You can do a whole bunch and then you find one,
Mm,
and it kind of challenges you to think about things a little differently, or you've challenged yourself. Maybe you've heard something else that kind of makes you think of it, and then there's another, a short time
mm,
after that. So there's a lot of those things at times. I've been very lucky in that I've never lacked for an idea about writing.
right.
It's I gosh, I just want to keep doing it. It's writing music is, I think of myself first as a composer. That's what I am. When someone
Okay.
says, "What do you play?" I say, "Well, I'm a composer and I play a lot of different instruments."
Mm,
Um, but in terms of thinking of one particular one that gave me a real challenge, um, it's hard to say. There's gosh, it's really hard to pick one. Um,
or
it's
maybe a particular genre of film or TV. Is there something that you think is in general more challenging for you, but at the same time you're quite entertained by that challenge?
Yeah. Well, I'll say one thing that's interesting about that. I've scored a lot of documentaries. So I've been really blessed to work with amazing filmmakers who are really at the top of their craft in terms of being documentary filmmakers. And that
Mm,
community of people is extraordinary because I'm not just a hired gun. I'm sitting there talking to the director, talking to the editor about what we're really trying to convey here. What feeling are we trying to emote? Um,
mm,
and it's it's a great challenge. I love this challenge of like, okay, how am I going to do that musically? And
mm,
it's an odd thing in a way when someone says, "Look, I need something that has tension, but it's not too dark. There's just this kind of
mm.
light tension, and this main character feels a little pensive in this moment." Right? And you're like, "Oh gosh, okay, so what does that sound like?"
Yeah.
And the way it works often is you sit down and you just write something. You write some music and
Mm,
then start to work it. You have to work it. And then you start to make it a little more tense or a little pensive. Or maybe there's
yeah.
something else. As you're working on it, you start to see another emotion that comes out in it.
Yeah.
Uh, it's an odd skill. And often that, if we talked about what the challenge is, I would say that's the challenge is how do we take what we speak about, what we describe in emotional terms, and how do you make
Yeah.
that come about in
Exactly.
music?
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I watch a film or a TV, program or a documentary, I think, as you say, sort of the emotion is sort of exacerbated, further by the choice of music. Um,
Yeah.
when you watch a film or TV documentary, particularly with your composer hat on, do you sometimes feel that, or to what extent do you feel that music can actually make or break the success of a film? Is it that much of a component as an integral part of a film's success?
I don't know about make or break a film and the old cliche of, the director coming in and say, "Look, we really need you to save the scene." Yeah,
Mm,
I don't know if that really carries, the weight that some of us think in the way it's been expressed before. It
mm,
definitely will change the mood of the show, though. Whether it's a TV show, film, documentary, whatever. In documentaries, my approach in most of the projects I work on is not to spoon feed the audience, not so
mm,
much to tell the audience how to feel, not
mm,
to say it specifically, but to give them the feeling in a way of subtext, let's say.
mm,
Whereas a dramatic film, especially if you think of an action film, that's going to hit you over the head with what you're supposed to feel. We want you to feel this way, and is more of the approach there. In documentaries, it doesn't happen so much that way. It's much more subtle and probably a bit more nuanced as well,
right, right, right. Okay.
which is a great challenge. It, it's
Yeah.
it, it's a lot of fun to do that way if you really want to get into it, because then of course you have timings. So, at the very beginning, we feel this way, but in the middle, it kind of takes a little bit of a turn. So we want to
Mm,
feel a little, like, go back to the tension idea, a little less tension here. But
yeah.
then when the main character says X, Y, and Z, now we understand, why she feels so pensive. And we've
Yeah.
really got to bring up the tension here.
Tension.
It's
Tension.
like getting into the little details of it. That's the
Yeah.
key.
When you watch a film or TV program, does your mind waver, or do you go into that composer mode, or do you simply just watch it, just
Yeah.
like anyone else?
I I love just sitting and watching a good film. I I love that. I love going back to old films and watching old films just to enjoy the film. If you're going to be a great composer in film or TV, you have to understand story.
Okay.
And that's the key. That's the key to the whole thing in my opinion. If you
Mm,
understand story, then you can have your music have the narrative arc that's
yeah.
necessary to help convey that story. In the best
Right.
of times, I think the music is offering subtext to the story in telling
Mm,
a story that may not be on the screen.
right.
Um, when we read a great book, we often get all the detail and all this stuff, but it's impossible to really translate a book into a
Mm,
film or TV show.
the film.
We get a feel
Yeah.
for it. We definitely get the vibe. It inspires it. It can create something entirely different that's wonderful on its own. But
Mm,
I'm looking to try to bring in something that's a little different that way. In my
yeah.
approach to it.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
that's
And
that's a
then
good.
to answer your question, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but to answer your question more
Oh,
specifically, when I'm sent a film to work on, I always watch it first as a viewer, as the audience, because I want to see if the film moves me first. Is
yeah.
this a story that I can identify with, or I can, at least connect with enough that I can get behind this? So I
Mm,
don't think about, watching it. I don't even want to watch it as a composer. I just want to watch it as an audience
right.
member first.
Right.
Then I'll watch
Right.
it again as a composer, thinking
Yeah.
about it. And I'll watch it several times before I start working.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about your latest project, An Exquisite Moment. Um, Brilliant album.
Thank you.
I know what my favorite track is. For some reason, I think it's number three, Drifting.
Ah,
In honor, I think it's got a very sort of sentimental feel to it, for me, and it sort of casts my mind and history back to a time in New York when I was with my uncle, actually. So
mm,
again, it shows the sort of the emotive sort of connect you have with certain music and certain feeling
absolutely.
that it draws. I think my first question for you regarding that is, how did you select the artist to work with on this particular project?
It's an interesting thing. Having worked in TV and film so long, when you record music for that, you hire the best players you can find.
Mm.
You often have a tight time budget, probably a tight monetary budget as well, but you want to get it right the first time, and you want to bring something extraordinary to
Mhm.
the score of what you're working on. So this is where I come from. I come from a place of always get the best players, no matter what. You're making a recording. Get the best players you
Mhm.
can find, which means, to clarify that, get the right player. Get the player who is going to give you the sound that you're looking for, or the player you need to collaborate with in a certain way to get
Oh,
something. Um, my first call for this was to Donnie McCaslin, and Donnie knew each other. We knew each other from Berkeley, actually. We hadn't spoken in quite some time, but we have mutual friends, and we'd hear about each other. And of course, I see all the great things he's doing out there. And I'd been listening to him for years. And when this project came up, I was like, he's the voice. If I could play sax,
mm.
and that's the sound that I want for this record. Again, I'm working with all sorts of instruments. It doesn't have to be any particular. Everything is open. I'm not thinking standard jazz quartet or something like that. I'm thinking like, who do I want to work with also? Who has that sound? And when I listen to
Right.
Donnie playing, I'm
Mm.
transported, and I listen to how he crafts a solo, and he thinks thematically in the way he approaches the solo, and it has an
Mm.
arc in it. And I was like, that is the sound I want. If I could solo like that, if I could play sax like that, that's who I'd want to be. That's my
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah.
And that became the kind of bar, so to speak, that I set when we were talking about, okay, who's going to play?
Yeah.
When it came time to choose percussion, and typically for a lot of records, you wouldn't have a percussionist on the basic date. It's very often something you would add later. And I've worked with
Right.
amazing percussionists from, all over the country and all over the world. And I was
Mhm.
like, I I don't need someone who's going to sit and play a conga part, as great as that is. That's not what I need. I need a color person. I need someone who's going to add these colors to the sound and bring something else out in the music. And I want someone who can also work with the drummer, in this case, Eric
Yeah.
Harlan. And I'm
Mm.
thinking, who can that be? And Mina was, in some ways, a really obvious choice. We had not worked together before. We didn't know each other. We had several mutual friends, one of which introduced us. And,
Uh,
I had almost nothing to say to Mina during the sessions. Everything he did was just so spot on. And that's part of what you go for, because you want to have players who understand your vision and can then take that and elevate it. I don't ask them to say, hey, can you play it like some other, say to Eric Harley, could you play it like Steve Gadd? I'm never going to say that, and I
yeah.
would never say that to Steve Gadd either. You
Yeah.
know, Eric is Eric. He's an artist himself. And
Yeah.
choosing the drums, I knew I wanted someone who could flow, who could play through everything and be open, but not just locking it down to a groove. I wanted something more. And the whole essence of this, the basic session that we did, which is really the essence of the sound of the album, was
Mm.
experimentation. It was all about risk. I was coming in with no demos, no rehearsals. I sent the guys the music a week before. I said, look this
Mm.
over if you'd like to. But the whole
Mm.
idea was the concept of, what are we going to get in those first moments when we play it? When I sit down at
Yeah.
the piano, I did this morning. I sat down to the piano. I played literally 2 chords. Boom, iPhone comes out, hit voice memo, start recording. And I'm just improvising for the next 5 minutes. And I'm so
Right.
glad I did that because that first thing that you do, a lot of
Mm.
artists, painters, musicians, composers will want to work first thing in the morning because that's when all the ideas are so fresh.
Sure.
It's interesting. It either goes there or it goes all the way to the end of the day. It's like one or the other. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was the whole idea. So in choosing these people to work with, it wasn't, it was not like, oh yeah, well, Minos played with like Weather Report, Miles Davis, and Sting. That didn't matter. All of it comes from who's the best player, who's going to gel with the other players, how is this going to work. When I decided to have harp on What Dreamers Dream, I'd been listening to Brandy's playing for years, and I was, that's the sound, that's it, that's what I want. Why wouldn't I go to Brandy Younger? Of course I would go to her, right? Let's make it the best thing we can. That's it. Lisa Fisher was another truly inspired choice. Joe Martin, my co-producer, and I had been working on the arrangement of the song An Exquisite Moment, and he put forward, we'd kind of toyed around with this idea of vocals, and then he was like, no, I think this will really work, and I'm like totally into it. And then he says, Lisa Fisher, that's the singer. And interestingly, I was not as familiar with her work before, and I went and listened. I think I listened for less than 1 minute, and I called Joe immediately. I said, that's it, done. She's the right one. Let's go. And that's what it is. It's about finding the right player for the tune. It's not about creating a star-studded, there are plenty of people on the album. There's 30 musicians on the album. 2/3 of those musicians are not as well known as the 10 players who are really well known on the album.
Yeah.
But to a studio musician, they may know all 30. Yeah, that's possible. Who knows?
Yeah.
Always get the best. Always.
No, well, exactly. If you want something which is going to be as memorable as this album, then it's it serves well to get the best that you can, and you've definitely done that. In terms of the theme you have of having that sort of full listening experience, to what stage, when do you feel that you've accomplished that project to say that, okay, well, it's done, it's now finished? Could you sort of give us a sort of a rundown of the whole production process, and once you've put your instruments down and said, yeah, that's it?
There were some songs that the rough mixes right from the first recording session, we felt like, oh, we're there. What Dreamers Dream was one of those. That is almost straight off of the basic session, except we added Brandy to it afterwards, because I felt like this one thing is going to elevate the tune. And sure enough, it completely, sealed the deal, and we were done. That was the simplest of things. There were some pieces that I went in knowing I wanted to add some strings, add some winds. This is part of who I am. I'm writing for various orchestral groups and ensembles my whole life. This is not like, oh, this would be cool, like, let's put some strings on this. No, this is all part of my vocabulary. And that speaks to the whole album. This was one of the most organic projects I have ever done. There was not one false step, not one forced move, nothing about it. Everything just felt right. So we go into the recording studio and we record a track like Astral Projection, which is a 16.5-minute epic, 4-part suite, essentially. And the third part of that, which is called Bliss, there's a bass solo. And I came in with just what we needed, nothing more. It was just the chords, the rhythm, the feel of what we were going to do. And in this case, there's no melody in the section. I really set it up just to feature Scott Culley. I just wanted to feature him on this. And as we were getting ready to record it, I said to Scott, I think I said this to only him, I said, I'm going to arrange some strings after you record your bass. I didn't even talk about the winds because it wasn't my idea then to do that. But I said, I'm going to arrange some strings around what you're playing. And that's all I said, just to give him that information. I didn't tell anybody else in the band. It wasn't really necessary. And I remember finishing that piece, and then Scott saying to me, well, I can't wait to hear what you do, you know? And, you know, and I did exactly what I said I was going to. I arranged these strings around it. And then I thought that the woodwinds also, I had an odd wind section. I think on that piece, it's flute, clarinet, trombone, and alto sax. So it's not just woodwinds, it's kind of winds.
Yeah. Right.
It's an odd mix. And but they really helped to elevate it. So we would record that, just to use that as an example. We recorded that. I brought it back to my studio, then sat, arranged all the string stuff to it after that. And I did that with other sections of Astral Projection. I did it with Rumi and the Whirling Dervish and A Change of Heart. And am I missing anything else? I think that's it. I think that's all that had strings on it, strings and winds. And so I did all the arranging here. And then in Los Angeles, we recorded all of those players at a studio here in LA. We had 9 string players, 4 wind players. And then it's a matter of, mixing it in. But again, it's the sound that we established at the power station when we recorded the first, the basic sessions. That's where the whole vibe comes from.
Right.
So, so we record that. On Astral Projection, we also added tuba, Marcus Rojas. We added piano, Scott Tibbs. We added Randy Brecker playing trumpet on that brilliantly, I might add. Did a couple of other overdubs. I played some electric bass on it. I think Joe did a little bit of percussion on it as well. And we get to a point. Now that's actually a great example. You asked when do you know you're done, right?
Yeah.
You can keep going, right? You can just keep going. But this is a piece that I literally wrote out entirely beforehand. So it's all written. Unlike some of the other tunes are all written also, but this is set up more like there's a solo section here, the solo section, and so the arrangement is more in place, at least in my mind, before we go into the basic recording session. And I have everything written, and I know what it's going to be, and I've done this so many times, in terms of just recording, that we get to a point, and I'm like, okay, we're done. There was literally on that piece, we did not record one more thing than was used in the piece. That was it. You can often go out and record a whole bunch of things and not use them. There's a whole story about An Exquisite Moment, because that's the most that's the song that went under the most changes from the original session. But in Astral Projection, and I think almost all the other tunes, there's not one thing that was recorded that was like, nah, we're not going to use that. So it was very clear about it that way. And then all along the way, Joe is kind of slowly mixing it, making different little tweaks here and there in the mix. We might edit a little something. And then Joe did the final mix, a brilliant job mixing the album. And then we were like, okay, we're done. Let's go master it.
Yeah. No, we could all listen to it. So in terms of the idea, I mean, how long were you planning on doing this? I mean, was there where was the original idea? Was it an ongoing process, but you just didn't have time, or was it just brewing in the background?
Right.
How did it originate?
Oh, how did it originate? Well, the origination story is kind of crazy in a way. For the past 6 years, I've been very focused on setting time aside just to write my own music, away from scoring films and things like this. Right. And that process has been about discovery. It was not writing music for a commission, not writing for an ensemble, not writing for a record, not writing for anything specific, just as a process of my own discovery. What if I did
Okay.
this? What if I did that? What's my voice? Does my voice sound good here? Is this working? That kind of stuff. And for the most part, that took the form of chamber music, I would say, or what some people would call chamber music. Interesting, odd ensembles. I wrote a piece for 5 cellos, a lot of solo piano stuff, different things like that. But
Mm.
then one day, in one of those moments, I'm sitting in my studio, I'm sitting right here, and I start playing these bass lines. And I'm like, it's kind of a cool bass line. Hit record. Okay, I've recorded the bass line. Then I'm thinking, what would the melody be like for that? So, we'll put the synth on, just play the melody in. And then
Right.
maybe I'll play a chord. But then I played another bass line. And within the day, without trying, without thinking about it, I had written, I'd say probably 75% of the music on the album. It was
Wow.
all there. It needed to
Right.
be polished a bit. It wasn't like, you sit and you write the first thing and you just say, okay, that's it. I don't necessarily believe in that. It's just like you have to work it. It's like practicing something, You've got to
Yeah.
sit there and hone it and like, well, what if the melody went here? You've got to look at all the possible. Oh, I see. Why should it go here? There's a
Mm.
reason behind everything and a lot of thought. So, but that one day, I wrote all this music. And then I came back to it and I did polish it a little bit. And a week later, I called up Joe Martin, who's a good friend of mine. And I told him the whole thing. And I said, what I just told you. And then I said, this is kind of weird, but this is a recording. This is already telling me what it is, how it should
Mm.
exist in the world.
Mm.
And this is a record. And if I do this record, at the time I said, if I do this record, it's got to be all played live in the studio, not an overdub process, not sending tracks to people to record at home. This is, this is how it has to happen because the interaction is critical. And then
Yeah.
I would need to have the players who can understand how to do that, how to interact. That was the whole key. It's kind of like, in straight ahead jazz, of course, everybody's reacting to each other, but there are
Yeah.
forms and things that are already, determined for many, many years of playing standards and things like that. Well, this is not that. So I need
Mhm.
people, but it's not free either. It kind of falls
Sure.
somewhere in between. It's not just free
Mm.
jazz. It,
Yeah.
I need players who really understand both of those things out here, the traditional thing and the free jazz thing. And we need to find, those folks who can do that in the middle,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I told him the
Yeah.
whole story. And without even hearing a note, Joe said, I said, I'm sorry, I moved ahead too fast. I said, look, if I do this, I know myself well enough. I said, I'm never going to get it over the line if I do it by myself. Would you co-produce this with me? And right there on the phone, without hearing a note, he said yes. And I was like,
Excellent.
damn, now I've got to do it. But that's a good thing, right? It's like,
Yeah.
in a really positive way. So
Yeah.
that's the origin of how it started right there.
Excellent. No, that's a great story. So now it's out. Now that you've accomplished the 6-year task project, what's next? Are you exploring a follow up album? Is it too early to sort of commit yourself to that, or are there other sort of compositions in chain for you to work on?
I have to tell you, this was the most thrilling and exciting musical project I've done.
Excellent.
It was so good. I remember telling all my friends afterwards, and I said, "How can I not do this again? This is living. This is life. This is joy. This is unbridled excitement. It's like, yeah, I've got to do it again." I don't want to stop scoring either. I enjoy the scoring work too. So
Yeah.
I'm planning the next record right now,
Okay.
and hopefully we'll get into the studio this year is what I'm hoping. It's sometimes it can be a challenge when you want to work with certain people at the same time because you've got to deal with people's schedules, and to get
Sure,
everyone's schedule to line up can be a challenge. So that's why I say hopefully it'll happen this year.
sure,
Um,
sure.
People are getting booked really, far out in advance.
Mm,
But absolutely, no, I don't know how many albums worth of music I have, pretty much ready to go.
excellent,
So we'll see.
excellent.
I don't know what form it's going to take, the next record. That's an interesting thing, and that's what I'm kind of having fun with right now. You know,
Mm, mm,
Improvisation has always been something really close to my heart, and something that I find personally so satisfying. To listen to that. Again, though, I see myself as the composer, and I love the idea of other people, playing my music and improvising on it. I like playing on it too. Don't get me wrong, but
sure.
it's collaboration.
Mm,
So, you know, again, it's like I want to think about it. I want to kind of ponder what's going to be right for the music.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I'm a believer in, you kind of start to pick the repertoire, and
yeah.
it tells you if you're really listening. It tells
Mm,
you how it should be recorded, what
that's
should happen.
true.
There's no
Yeah.
one answer. I could
Mm,
record all of that music on the album in all sorts of ways.
no,
So
exactly, exactly.
yeah,
Well, I look forward to your next project while I'm continually listening to this one. I mean, you
thanks.
mentioned collaboration. My last question for you, and it's more to do with collaboration across the disciplines. And prior to this interview, we were talking about the art, visual art, and paintings. I mean, could
Sure.
you elaborate on the importance it plays in what you do now, what work you produce in terms of your music?
Well, art has always been with me, especially fine arts. But then I started to learn how to see art in almost everything that we have, whether it's design or commercial art or
Mm,
graphic art, things like that. Um, so everything to me is informed by that. I had a great time, you know, being involved in the cover of the album, which involves three brilliant artists actually to get to that cover. So I love that. I love all the various artistic disciplines. I'm a huge fan of dance in all sorts of forms. I've read plenty about architecture and things like that, but I
brilliant.
probably spend most of my time in the art world outside of music, looking at paintings and things
Okay.
like that. And there was, I was mentioning before, there was this great exhibit in Paris last year. It was called Monet Mitchell, and it
Okay.
was Claude Monet and Joan Mitchell in one exhibit. It was at the
Mm,
Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris,
right.
and it's extraordinary because you we all know what Monet's work is, but his later work becomes almost abstract in certain ways.
Mm, mm,
And he dies a year after Joan Mitchell was born. So they never
right.
met. They lived in the
Okay.
same region outside of Paris, but
Mm,
you see the last works of Monet and then the work of Joan Mitchell throughout her life. And the parallel is extraordinary.
yeah.
And there's this one bit that was written there about how Monet said that he was trying to capture a feeling in his
Mm,
thing. I think he used the word sensation, actually. He was trying to
right.
capture sensations in his painting. And I thought about it. I was like, that's me. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to. I think about those things more than I think about, oh, is that a clever melody, or is that like a piece that's going to challenge so and so or something like that.
Mm,
It kind of comes from my background in writing for film and TV. It's
yeah.
for me, the sensation and the feeling. You
Mm,
know, you even mentioned it in listening to Drifting. It
yeah.
brought up a feeling for you.
Okay, yeah,
That for me, that's what it's about, and that's what music's about. Also, we
yeah,
all have
definitely.
different vibes about what certain things are and what they should be doing for us. Um, but that's it for me. So when I look at the paintings and I think about, well, what were they thinking about? Where's the parallel? And am I inspired by this? Yeah, yeah, it speaks volumes to me. Just love it.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. No, Joel, thanks for your time. It's been
Oh,
great
thank you.
speaking with you.
This is great. This is really
We'll have to
super.
catch up again, particularly when you have your next album. So many thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, man. Thanks so much.
Take care. Pleasure.
Okay.